The border collie stood at the mouth of the old mine shaft, black and white fur soaked through from the rain, brown eyes locked on the darkness below. Scout was not barking, but Rebecca Hayes could hear him screaming. It was written in every trembling muscle of his body, in the way his paws scraped at the muddy edge, in those desperate brown eyes that held 4 hours of searching and pleading. "Let me go down, let me go down. Please let me go down." But Rebecca could not. The state mine safety inspector had been clear 3 years ago when they condemned this entire hillside. Entering meant violating federal law, risking cave-ins in unstable shafts, and potentially trapping more people who would need rescue. So Rebecca stood paralyzed in the rain while her dog begged silently, and 5-year-old Tyler Morrison ran out of time, somewhere in the flooded darkness 300 feet below. The Weather Service had just upgraded the flash flood warning. The boy had maybe 90 minutes before the lower tunnels filled completely with water. The storm hammering the Appalachian Mountains of West Virginia was supposed to be routine spring rain, but the forecast had been catastrophically wrong. 6 inches had fallen in 3 hours, and the ancient network of abandoned coal mines threading through these hills was filling like a massive underground reservoir. Rebecca had to choose between staying on the surface where it was legal and letting a kindergartner drown in the dark, or following her 7-year-old border collie into a death trap that had already claimed 11 miners back in 1987. The decision should have been obvious. She was not trained for mine rescue. She was not even technically a first responder anymore. But Scout knew something she did not, and the way he stared into that black hole with complete certainty made Rebecca question everything she thought she understood about rules and risk and doing the right thing. 18 months earlier, Scout had been a completely different dog. At 5.5 years old, he was at the peak of his career as a certified search and rescue dog with the West Virginia Mountain Rescue Association. Border collies are bred for intelligence and stamina, traits that made Scout exceptional at finding lost hikers in the rugged terrain of the Monongahela National Forest. He had 17 successful missions under his harness, including an overnight search in February that located 2 hunters who had fallen through ice into a creek. Scout worked with another SAR dog named Blaze, a German shepherd who belonged to Rebecca's partner on the rescue team, a man named Marcus Webb. The 2 dogs were inseparable during training and missions, often working together to cover more ground, communicating in that wordless way that bonded working dogs develop. Rebecca had been an EMT for 12 years before a car accident damaged her back badly enough that she could no longer lift patients or work the demanding shifts. The injury forced her into retirement at 40, leaving her adrift and purposeless until she discovered search and rescue volunteering. Getting certified as a SAR handler gave her a new mission. Training Scout gave her a reason to push through the chronic pain and depression that followed her career-ending injury. The border collie was not just a working dog. He was her partner, her therapist, and the reason she got up at 5 in the morning to run training drills in the woods behind her property. Scout excelled at the work in a way that seemed almost supernatural. He could pick up a scent trail hours old, track it across streams and rocky ground where human searchers saw nothing, and indicate a find with a specific bark pattern that Rebecca learned to recognize from hundreds of yards away. He was tireless, focused, and absolutely committed to his job. Marcus used to joke that Scout took the work more seriously than most of the human volunteers. The dog seemed to understand on some deep level that finding people mattered, that every search was someone's loved one lost in the wilderness. That speed meant the difference between rescue and recovery. Then came the search in October that changed everything. A 9-year-old girl named Haley Patterson had wandered away from a family camping trip in the Cranberry Wilderness. The initial search lasted 6 hours with no sign of the child, and darkness was falling fast. The temperature was dropping toward freezing, and the little girl was wearing only a light jacket. The incident commander deployed all available dog teams in a desperate grid search of the most likely areas. Scout and Blaze went in together with Rebecca and Marcus, covering the steep terrain along a creek drainage where searchers thought the girl might have followed the water downhill. They had been searching for 90 minutes when Blaze found something. The German shepherd's bark pattern changed to the find indication, and Marcus called it in on the radio. Rebecca and Scout hurried to their position about 40 yards away, crashing through mountain laurel in the dark. They found Marcus at the edge of a cliff where the hillside dropped away into a ravine. Blaze was leaning over the edge, barking frantically down into the darkness. Haley Patterson was visible in their flashlight beams, clinging to a small ledge about 15 feet below the rim, crying and terrified, but miraculously uninjured. The rescue should have been straightforward. Rope team was already en route. All they had to do was keep the girl calm and wait for the technical climbers. But the ledge Haley was on gave way. 1 second she was there. The next she was falling into the black void of the ravine, screaming. Blaze went after her. The German Shepherd did not hesitate, did not wait for Marcus's command, just launched himself off the cliff trying to reach the child. Marcus screamed his dog's name and dove after him, grabbing for Blaze's harness. He caught it. For one frozen moment, Marcus hung, suspended over the edge, holding 80 pounds of German Shepherd by the handle on the dog's vest. Then the weight was too much and Marcus lost his grip on the rocks he was clinging to. Both man and dog fell into the ravine. Rebecca heard them hit the rocks below. It was a sound she would never forget, a wet, heavy impact that meant broken things and bad outcomes. She and Scout waited at the top in frozen horror until the technical team arrived 17 minutes later and rigged the rope systems needed to descend safely. By the time they reached the bottom, Marcus was unconscious with a severe head injury and a shattered femur. Haley Patterson had landed in a deeper pool of water and was somehow uninjured except for a broken wrist. She was crying for her mother and for the big dog who had tried to save her. They found Blaze wedged between 2 boulders at the base of the waterfall. The German Shepherd had taken the full impact of the fall trying to shield the child. He was still alive when they reached him, but barely. His back was broken. The veterinarian who met them at the emergency animal hospital said the damage was catastrophic, the kind of spinal injury that left no hope for recovery. Marcus was in surgery and could not make the decision, so his sister, who had medical power of attorney, made it for him. Blaze was euthanized at 1 in the morning while Rebecca held his head and told him he was a good boy, the best boy, a hero. Marcus survived, but would never walk normally again. The head injury left him with chronic migraines and balance problems that ended his search and rescue career. He moved to Arizona 6 months later to live with his sister and try to rebuild a life that no longer included mountains or working dogs or the mission that had defined him. Scout watched his partner leave and seemed to understand that Blaze was not coming back. The border collie sank into a depression so profound it was like watching him die in slow motion. The change was immediate and total. The dog, who used to vibrate with barely contained energy, now moved through the house like a ghost. Scout stopped eating except when Rebecca forced food on him. He stopped playing with his favorite toys, stopped bringing her the training dummy to throw, stopped doing the automatic border collie crouch and stare at any small animal that moved in the yard. His brilliant mind that used to solve problems and learn new commands in minutes just shut down. He would lie for hours staring at nothing, occasionally making a low whine that sounded like mourning. Rebecca tried everything: different food, different routines, medications prescribed by the vet for anxiety and depression. She reached out to other SAR handlers for advice. Everyone said time would help, that dogs grieve just like people and eventually adjust. But weeks turned into months, and Scout only got worse. He stopped responding to his name. He developed a strange behavior where he would walk to the door of the mudroom where the SAR gear was stored, sit down, and stare at Blaze's old harness hanging on its hook. He would stay there for hours if Rebecca let him, just staring at the empty harness like he was waiting for his friend to come back. The local SAR coordinator gently suggested that Scout might never work again, that some dogs could not come back from trauma this severe, that it might be kinder to retire him permanently and let him live out his life as a pet. But Rebecca could not accept that. She had already lost her EMT career, lost Marcus as a partner and friend, lost the sense of purpose that came from active SAR missions. Losing Scout to grief felt like losing the last piece of herself that mattered. She kept training with him, kept running the drills, kept hoping something would spark his interest again. Nothing worked. Scout went through the motions mechanically, doing what he was told but without any of the joy or drive that made him exceptional. He was alive, but he was not living. 15 months passed. Winter gave way to spring, and the mountains turned green again with new growth. Rebecca had mostly given up hope that Scout would recover. She kept him comfortable, kept him fed, kept him close, but she had stopped believing he would ever be the dog he used to be. Her own depression had deepened alongside his. She was 42 years old, living alone on 70 acres of rural West Virginia hillside, her body still hurting from injuries that would never fully heal, watching her dog die of grief she could not fix. She had started wondering what the point of any of it was. Then, on a Tuesday morning in late April, everything changed. Rebecca was splitting firewood behind the barn when she heard Scout bark for the first time in over a year. It was not the play bark or the alert bark she remembered from his working days. It was sharp, urgent, continuous. She dropped the axe and ran around the barn to find Scout standing rigid at the edge of her property line, staring down the old logging road that connected her land to the neighboring Morrison farm. A small figure was walking up the dirt track, and as Rebecca shaded her eyes against the morning sun, she realized it was Tyler Morrison, the 5-year-old boy from the farm a mile down the mountain. Tyler should not have been on her property. His parents were strict about boundaries and stranger danger. The child was crying, stumbling, obviously terrified. Rebecca hurried down to meet him with Scout at her side. The boy saw the dog and stopped walking, and for a moment the three of them stood there in the warming morning air. Then Tyler said in a small shaking voice that his baby sister Emma had stopped breathing and his mama was screaming and his daddy had driven to get help, but Tyler did not know what to do, so he ran to find the dog. Tyler had heard his parents talk about the rescue dog that lived up the mountain, the dog who found lost people. In his 5-year-old logic, a dog who found people could help his sister. Rebecca's EMT training kicked in immediately. She scooped up Tyler, sprinted to her truck with Scout jumping in behind them, and raced down the logging road to the Morrison farm. She found Angela Morrison on the kitchen floor performing CPR on a blue-tinged infant, while Tyler's 2 other siblings watched in frozen horror. Rebecca took over compressions while Angela did rescue breaths, and Scout sat beside Tyler the whole time, leaning against the crying boy like a warm, solid anchor. Emma Morrison survived. The ambulance arrived 8 minutes after Rebecca got there, and the paramedics transported the baby to the hospital where doctors determined she had choked on a piece of food and gone into respiratory arrest. Tyler's quick thinking to get help and Rebecca's immediate intervention saved the infant's life. Angela Morrison sobbed and thanked Rebecca over and over, and later when things calmed down, she told Rebecca that Tyler had talked about the rescue dog for months, ever since overhearing his parents discuss the search that had saved Haley Patterson. The boy had believed with perfect 5-year-old certainty that Scout could fix anything. Something changed in Scout that day. Helping Tyler seemed to flip a switch in the dog's brain, reactivating neural pathways that had been dormant for 15 months. Scout started eating normally again. He started playing with his toys, bringing Rebecca the training dummy, doing the border collie stare at squirrels in the yard. His energy came back slowly at first, then faster, like a battery recharging. Within 2 weeks he was running trails with Rebecca again, and within a month he was doing refresher training for search and rescue certification. The dog who had been broken by loss had found something to live for again, helping people, saving lives, doing the work that gave him purpose. Rebecca could see it in every movement Scout made. He was happy again. Not the same as before, the shadow of Blaze's death still lingered in moments when Scout would pause and look around as if searching for his missing partner, but functional, purposeful, alive. The local SAR coordinator was amazed and excited to have Scout back in rotation. They ran a certification test in June, and Scout passed easily, demonstrating all the skills Rebecca had thought were lost forever. He was officially back on the roster as an active search and rescue dog. Then came the last week of October, 17 months after Blaze died, and 5 months after Tyler Morrison brought Scout back to life. The weather forecast called for moderate rain, typical for autumn in the mountains. No one predicted what actually happened. A stalled cold front collided with warm, moist air from the Gulf, creating a weather system that meteorologists later called a 1,000-year rain event. The storm hit on a Wednesday afternoon and did not stop. By evening, 6 inches had fallen, and the National Weather Service had upgraded to a flash flood warning for all of southern West Virginia. Rebecca was in her kitchen preparing dinner when her phone rang. It was Tyler Morrison, and the woman was screaming incoherently. Rebecca caught fragments. "Tyler, missing, old mines. Oh God, please help us." She grabbed Scout's SAR vest and harness, shoved her own emergency pack onto her back, and drove down to the Morrison farm with her hazard lights on, and rain so heavy she could barely see the road. She found Angela and her husband Paul standing in their front yard in the pouring rain, both soaked and panicking. Paul had called 911 40 minutes ago, but the state police said weather had grounded their helicopter and the nearest ground search teams were dealing with flooding emergencies all over the county. The official rescue was at least 3 hours out, maybe more. Tyler had been playing in the barn after school. Angela had left him there for 20 minutes while she fed the chickens, and when she came back, the boy was gone. They found his muddy footprints leading into the woods toward the old mining complex that honeycombed the hillside behind their property. The Morrison farm sat on land that had been strip-mined for coal in the 1,960 seconds, and the hillsides were riddled with abandoned shafts and tunnels that had been sealed decades ago. Sealed, but not perfectly. Kids from the area knew there were ways to get into some of the old workings through collapsed ventilation shafts and drainage portals that had eroded over time. Paul Morrison had explored those mines as a teenager and had forbidden Tyler from ever going near them, which of course meant the boy was fascinated by them. Paul had already searched the obvious entrance points and found nothing. Rebecca clipped Scout's harness on and let the dog sniff one of Tyler's shirts that Angela provided. The border collie hit the scent immediately and pulled toward the woods with purpose, moving fast despite the rain and failing light. Rebecca followed with a headlamp and handheld radio, with Paul and Angela stumbling behind through the undergrowth. Scout led them up a steep hillside, thick with second-growth forest, past the sealed entrance of mine number 7, past the old equipment yard, where rusting machinery sat in the rain, to a small depression in the hillside that Rebecca would have walked right past if Scout had not stopped there. It was a sinkhole, maybe 4 feet across, where the ground had collapsed into a drainage tunnel below. Rebecca could see recent disturbance in the mud around the edges, small handprints where a child had grabbed at roots and rocks. She leaned over the hole with her flashlight and saw the tunnel below, a rough shaft sloping down into darkness with water already starting to flow through it like a small river. And she heard something that made her heart stop. A child crying, faint and far away, echoing up from deep underground. Scout heard it too. The border collie went rigid, every muscle in his body focused on that sound. He whined, a desperate sound that reminded Rebecca viscerally of the night Blaze died, then looked up at her with those intelligent brown eyes, and the message was crystal clear. Tyler was down there, somewhere in the flooded tunnels, and Scout needed to go after him. Paul Morrison was already trying to climb down through the sinkhole when Rebecca grabbed his arm and pulled him back. The tunnel was too unstable, too steep, too dangerous. They needed to wait for the technical rescue team with proper equipment and training. Paul tried to pull away, shouting that his son was drowning, but Rebecca held firm. She had seen too many recovery missions that started with someone making an emotional decision that got more people killed. She made Paul stay on the surface and radioed the state police dispatcher with their exact GPS coordinates and the situation update. The dispatcher said the nearest mine rescue team was coming from Charleston, at least 2.5 hours out in this weather, maybe longer. 2.5 hours. Rebecca did the math in her head. The weather service had said another 4 inches of rain was coming in the next 2 hours. These old mines drained into lower collection tunnels that channeled water toward the main portal down in the valley. If Tyler was in the lower system, which seemed likely based on how far away his cries sounded, He had maybe 90 minutes before those tunnels filled completely. 2.5 hours for rescue meant Tyler would be dead before anyone official arrived. Rebecca stood at the edge of that sinkhole with rain running down her face and Scout trembling beside her and every piece of her training screaming not to go down there. She was not mine rescue certified. She did not have breathing apparatus or communication equipment or a safety team. Going into an unstable flooded mine was textbook how to create a secondary victim. It was the exact scenario they drilled into search and rescue volunteers from day one. Do not become part of the problem. Wait for proper resources. Stay safe so you can help the next person. But Scout was not waiting. The border collie was staring at that black hole with the same focused intensity he used to have before Blaze died, before the depression, before everything fell apart. This was the dog Rebecca remembered. This was Scout at his absolute best. Every instinct and trained response firing at once, telling her there was a person down there who needed help and they were running out of time. Rebecca made a decision that would either save a child's life or end her own. She told Paul and Angela Morrison to stay on the surface and call down every 15 minutes so she could follow their voices back out. She took off her heavy rain jacket, stuffed her medical kit and 4 chemical light sticks into a waterproof bag, clipped her harness to Scout's vest so they would not get separated in the dark, and lowered herself into the sinkhole. Scout jumped down immediately after her, landing sure-footed on the sloping mud of the drainage tunnel below. The opening above them was a circle of grey, stormy daylight that got smaller as they descended into the mountain. The tunnel was worse than Rebecca expected. It was barely 3 feet high, forcing her to crawl on hands and knees through cold, flowing water that already reached her wrists. Scout moved ahead on the leash, pulling her forward through the darkness that swallowed her headlamp beam after 20 feet. The walls were rough coal with exposed timbers that looked like they might collapse if she breathed on them wrong. Water dripped from the ceiling, and she could hear the larger sound of rushing water somewhere ahead, the main flow that was filling the lower mine workings. They crawled for what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes, descending steadily through a maze of interconnected tunnels that had no maps, no markers, nothing to indicate which direction led to Tyler Morrison or which led to a dead end where they would both drown. Rebecca followed Scout because she had no other choice. The dog moved with confidence, nose down, tracking something she could not see or smell. Every few minutes she would stop and listen, and once she heard it again, a child crying, still far away but definitely there. The tunnel they were in suddenly dropped away into a vertical shaft. Rebecca's headlamp illuminated a 6-foot drop to another tunnel below, this one taller, maybe 5 feet high, with water rushing through it fast enough to knock her over if she was not careful. Scout jumped down without hesitation, landing in water up to his chest and immediately pulling against the leash toward the left. Rebecca had no idea if left was the right direction, but she trusted her dog more than she trusted her own judgment. She lowered herself down, gasped at the shock of waist-deep cold water, and waded after Scout into the flooded darkness. They found Tyler Morrison 30 minutes later in a collapsed side chamber where the ceiling had partially caved in, creating a small air pocket above the rising water. The 5-year-old boy was sitting on a pile of rocks, with his knees pulled up to his chest, shaking violently from hypothermia, crying for his mother. Scout reached him first, barking the find indication that Rebecca had not heard in 17 months, and Tyler grabbed the dog like he was the only solid thing left in the world. Rebecca pulled herself into the chamber and immediately wrapped the boy in her emergency blanket, checking for injuries by feel in the terrible light of her headlamp. Tyler was soaked and freezing but seemed uninjured except for scrapes and bruises. He kept saying he was sorry. He just wanted to see the mines. He did not mean to fall down the hole. He did not mean to make everyone scared. Rebecca told him he was safe now, that Scout had found him just like he found all the lost people, and that they were going to get him back to his mama. She meant it when she said it. She had no idea if it was actually true. The water in the chamber had risen noticeably just in the few minutes since she arrived. They needed to move now, or they would be trapped here when the tunnels flooded completely. She put Tyler on her back, piggyback style, wrapped the harness leash around her wrist so she would not lose, Scout in the dark, and started crawling back the way they had come. The return trip was a nightmare. The water was higher now, reaching Rebecca's chest in some sections, and the current was strong enough that she had to brace against the walls to avoid being swept away. Tyler clung to her shoulders, his small body shaking uncontrollably, and Scout pulled them forward with single-minded determination. The border collie seemed to know exactly where he was going, even though everything looked the same to Rebecca, just endless rough-hewn tunnels and rising water and darkness pressing in from all sides. They were maybe 100 yards from the vertical shaft that led back up to the drainage tunnel when Rebecca's headlamp died. Rebecca told him he was safe now, that Scout had found him just like he found all the lost people, and that they were going to get him back to his mama. She meant it when she said it. She had no idea if it was actually true. The water in the chamber had risen noticeably just in the few minutes since she arrived. They needed to move now, or they would be trapped here when the tunnels flooded completely. She followed the dog by feel, one hand on the rough wall, the other holding the leash, trusting that Scout's nose and memory were enough. They made it to the vertical shaft by pure luck and Scout's guidance. Rebecca boosted Tyler up first, telling him to climb to the tunnel above and wait there. Then she hauled herself up after him with Scout scrambling up behind her, all of them soaked and exhausted and shaking. The drainage tunnel was flooded now too, water up to Rebecca's thighs and rising, but at least she could see again. Daylight filtered down from the sinkhole entrance 50 yards above them, grey and dim but enough to navigate by. They crawled up that last section with water pouring down around them like they were inside a waterfall, and Paul Morrison's voice shouting down from the surface. "Tyler! Tyler, can you hear me?" They emerged into the storm 97 minutes after going underground. Angela Morrison grabbed her son and sobbed into his muddy hair, and Paul wrapped his arms around both of them. Rebecca collapsed in the rain with Scout beside her, both of them too tired to move. The state police arrived 20 minutes later with a mine rescue team who looked at the sinkhole entrance and told Rebecca she was either very lucky or very crazy to have survived going in there. The geology was unstable and the tunnels were actively flooding. If she had been down there another hour, the exit would have been underwater and they would have drowned. But they did not drown. Tyler Morrison was alive because Scout had tracked him through a maze of underground passages that should have been impossible to navigate. The local media picked up the story, and suddenly Rebecca's phone was ringing with interview requests and thank you messages. The Morrison family called Scout a hero. The state police grudgingly admitted that the dog had saved a life, but also made it very clear that Rebecca had violated multiple safety protocols and should never do anything like that again. Rebecca agreed. She had no interest in ever going into an abandoned mine again. Once was enough. Scout came out of the experience changed in a way Rebecca could not quite explain. The border collie had always been driven and focused, but now he seemed to carry himself with a quiet confidence that had not been there even before Blaze died. It was like saving Tyler underground in conditions that should have killed them all had proven something to Scout, some essential truth about his own capabilities and purpose. He knew now, with absolute certainty, that he was good at this work, that he could find people when it mattered most, that his nose and instincts were enough even when everything else failed. 2 years passed. Tyler Morrison turned 7 and started 2nd grade. Scout continued working search and rescue missions across West Virginia, with 11 successful finds added to his record. Rebecca's back pain never went away, but she learned to manage it, and having an active working dog gave her the same sense of purpose that Scout had rediscovered. They were both survivors who had found meaning in helping others survive. The grief over Blaze's death faded into a manageable ache, something they carried but were no longer crushed by. Then on a cold morning in December, Rebecca woke to Scout barking frantically at the back door. It was just after dawn, and she stumbled out of bed confused because Scout never barked like this unless he was indicating a find. She opened the door, and the border collie shot out into the grey pre-dawn light, running toward the tree line behind her barn. Rebecca grabbed her boots and coat and followed, calling Scout's name, worried he had seen a bear or was chasing deer, But Scout was not running toward prey. He was running towards something that made him skid to a stop at the edge of the woods and begin barking in the specific pattern that meant person found, person needs help. Rebecca caught up to him and saw what Scout had seen. Someone was sitting against a tree trunk about 30 yards into the forest. As she got closer, she realized it was Marcus Webb, her former SAR partner who had moved to Arizona 2 years ago after Blaze died. Marcus looked terrible, thin, exhausted, his face drawn with pain. He was crying, which shocked Rebecca more than his sudden appearance. She had never seen Marcus cry. He tried to speak but could not get words out, just shook his head and pointed to his leg. The old injury from the fall that killed Blaze, the femur that never healed right, had fractured again. He had been hiking in the woods behind Rebecca's property trying to find his way to her house, and the leg had given out. He had been sitting against this tree for 4 hours in the freezing cold, unable to walk, too proud or too stupid to call 911, hoping she would somehow find him. Scout found him. The border collie, who had been Blaze's partner and best friend, who had grieved for over a year when the German shepherd died, had somehow sensed that Marcus needed help and led Rebecca straight to him. It felt like more than coincidence. It felt like the completion of something, a circle closing, a debt repaid. Marcus had fallen trying to save Haley Patterson. Blaze had died trying to save them both. And now Scout had saved Marcus. They got him to the hospital where surgeons repaired the fracture with plates and screws. Marcus stayed in West Virginia instead of returning to Arizona. He moved into Rebecca's guest cabin and started helping with Scout's training, teaching new volunteer SAR handlers the skills he had spent years perfecting. The nightmares that had plagued him since Blaze's death began to ease, and the chronic pain that had made his life miserable in Arizona's dry heat responded better to West Virginia's humid climate and the physical therapy routine Rebecca helped him establish. He was not the same man he had been before the accident, but he was whole again in the ways that mattered. Scout seemed content in a way Rebecca had never seen. The border collie had both his people back, both the humans who mattered most to him. He had saved Marcus the way Blaze had tried to save Haley Patterson, and in doing so, had completed the work his friend had started. Some nights, Rebecca would find Scout lying in the mudroom staring at Blaze's old harness that still hung on its hook. But now, when he looked at it, his tail wagged gently instead of his body trembling with grief. It was like he was sharing the day's news with a friend who was not there anymore, telling Blaze that everyone was okay now, that the humans were safe, that the work continued. On Christmas morning, 2 years after Scout found Tyler Morrison in the flooded mine, Rebecca and Marcus sat on her cabin porch with coffee and watched Scout run circles in the snow. The border collie was 9 years old now, still working, still vital, still certain of his purpose, in a way that made Rebecca's chest ache with gratitude. She thought about the terrible year after Blaze died, when Scout had been a ghost dog going through the motions of life without living. She thought about 5-year-old Tyler trusting that the rescue dog up the mountain could fix anything. The nightmares that had plagued him since Blaze's death began to ease, and the chronic pain that had made his life miserable in Arizona's dry heat responded better to West Virginia's humid climate and the physical therapy routine Rebecca helped him establish. He was not the same man he had been before the accident, but he was whole again in the ways that mattered. Scout seemed content in a way Rebecca had never seen. It was about being the certainty in the darkness, the guide when all the lights went out, the steady pull forward when giving up felt easier than continuing. Rebecca agreed and thought that maybe humans needed that too. Maybe they all needed to be Scouts sometimes, needed to trust their instincts and dive into the darkness because someone down there needed help. Maybe breaking the rules was not always wrong, if the rules meant watching people drown. Maybe grief did not disqualify you from saving others. Maybe in fact it qualified you specifically because you knew what loss felt like and would do anything to spare someone else that pain. Scout finished his circles in the snow and trotted back to the porch, tongue lolling, eyes bright with simple joy. Rebecca scratched behind his ears and told him he was a good boy, the best boy, a hero who had saved them all in different ways at different times. The border collie leaned against her leg, the way he used to lean against Tyler Morrison the day they saved Emma. solid and warm and certain, present for whatever came next, ready to find whoever needed finding, living proof that broken things could heal and that sometimes the only way out of the darkness was to trust the dog who promised he knew the way home.